happy to welcome our colleague from Slovakia, Professor Vasil Gluchman. Vasil, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. At the beginning, I apologize for this misconvenience and problems which are with my presentation. I hope that it will be very well during the next time. And really, I like to follow in many issues Clare's presentation, because really he present in many very important topics which are especially concerning also this Central European region, including Slovakia and Visegrad 4 countries. And may I ask you, Stephanie, to move to the next slide?
I'll try, Vasil, but for some reason it's not moving. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you can continue talking until I try to fix it. All right.
Oh, okay. So in this case, really, this Visegrad 4 countries group is from 4 countries. I mean, in this case, it concerns Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia. And originally, this project started in 1991 after the diminishing of this Soviet satellites group of communist countries within Central and Eastern Europe, including former Czechoslovakia. And it was continuation or such message, historical message to the first half of the 14th century, when at the Visegrad Castle, it's close to Danube, over Danube, and it's now very, very close to Slovak boundaries in Hungarian kingdom at the time. Met 3 kings of Central European kings. It was Czech, Polish, and Hungarian kings. And the reason for such a meeting in 1335, it was to solve conflict, especially between Czech and Polish kings concerning lands and economic, social, political interests of these countries and their kings. And they asked Hungarian king to do mediation between them and to help them find a solution for the future of this region. And really, perhaps for some decades, it was useful negotiations and contracts, which was the result of this Visegrad Castle meeting in 1335. And following this historical message, really, in 1991, met people or the leaders of these 3 countries. At the time, it was also the former Czechoslovakia. It means the presidents of the Hungary, Poland, and former Czechoslovakia. And they created this group for Visegrad 3. And after splitting of former Czechoslovakia, both independent republic, I mean the Czech Republic and Slovakia, became members of this group, and it was extended from Visegrad 3 to Visegrad 4 group. And the main aim of this group was to help them in this transitional movement on transformation from this totalitarian regime to democratic circumstances in new democratic circumstances, and also its economic transformation from this centrally planned economy to a market economy. And the final goal of these contracts and the cooperation was help all of them to become membership in NATO and EU. And really, despite many difficulties, misunderstandings, and so on, the result of this cooperation was that really Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic became members of NATO from 12 March 1999, and Slovakia 5 years ago, later, sorry, in 29 March 2004. This difference of membership among Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic on the one hand, and Slovakia on the other hand, was due to this fact that really in Slovakia from the beginning of independence of Slovak Republic, but not just from 1993 after the splitting of the former Czechoslovakia, but also very closely after the diminishing of communism in former Czechoslovakia, Slovak governments were very often populist, and they prefer such politics which could be very difficultly to accepted by Western European countries, including EU or NATO, because it was such effort by the former Slovak Prime Minister Vladimir Mečiar to become like middle between Russia on the one hand and EU or NATO on the other hand. And
Vasil, apologies for interrupting you. The slides are now working, so just tell me on which slide you want to be. Okay.
It's slide number 3.
Number, sorry?
3, yeah.
3. Okay.
You are right. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Really, due to these difficulties in internal political development of Slovakia, Slovak Republic was accepted like a member of NATO just from March of 24. However, due to this rapid, especially rapid economic and social transformation of Slovakia, from 1998, from the parliamentary elections in 1998, and one of such central right coalition of political parties, and their very, very strong effort to split this gap among Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic on the one hand, and Slovakia on the other hand, in effort to become member of European Union, they became together, like also Cyprus, membership or members of European Union from 1st May 2004. And in contrast to them, due especially really this central right government in Slovakia, I mean from 1998 to 2006, there was such event that really Slovakia became the part or member of Eurozone from 1st January 2009, and it's just one from this Visegrad Group 4, because Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary kept their national currency, and in many cases they expressed that they don't have an interest to accept euro and to be a member of Eurozone. Please, the next slide. Thanks. However, due to this political, social, economic development of these countries, there is very often such a nostalgia for the past and the socialism or communism, and due to these political processes, sometimes there are really effort and the tendency or trends for rise of extremism and populism. I think that generally populism is included in these countries and their political sense almost every time, with some differences, but there are also such trends or political movements which could prefer much more extreme solutions of some political or social problems within these countries. For example, in the past, few years ago, also in Hungary, it was political party Jobbik. In Czech Republic is now still Svoboda a přímá demokracie, in English, Liberty and Direct Democracy. And in Slovakia, it's Ľudová strana Naše Slovensko. In English translation, it's People's Party of Our Slovakia, Kotleba. And he is, I mean, Marian Kotleba, he is the chair of this political party, which became in the two last parliamentary elections like parliamentary party. So it means that really in these regions are such political trends and political parties which are also accepted by voters because they are members of national parliaments, and in some cases really they are dangerous because for example, the former Jobbik and this Slovak political party, Ľudová strana Naše Slovensko, I mean People's Party of Slovakia, had such paramilitary organizations because there was such effort to use this how to explain the dissolution or dissatisfaction of voters with governments with their political orientations for supporting of such extreme organization, and especially, for example, in Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, it's that there are very often attacks against Roma communities and immigrants generally, especially in this half of our 2015 or half of the previous last decade. It was a very strong effort against these refugees from Syria and this region. And if Claire has mentioned this Russian corruption and influences to Cyprus and Great Britain, and he mentions that Limassolgrad and Londongrad, perhaps it seems to me that this rise of extremism and populism is one of such influences of these Russian influences, perhaps corruptive financial, political influences to this Central Eastern Europe, due to this fact that really, like now during this Russian war conflict, according to Russian leaders, including or especially in Mr. Putin's speeches, is accepted like their territory or territory of their political and economic interests, and for this reason they have such strong effort to strongly influence these political processes within these countries. And in my opinion, really, in some cases, for example, in the case of this People's Party of Slovakia, Kotleba, there are indirect evidence about financial relationships between this political party and Russian funds. But it's not publicly presented, but there are such strong tendencies or opinions that really many such efforts and extremism in these countries and in this region is supported by Russia legally or illegally. For example, such legal effort is movement of night wolves of Russian motorcyclists who presented, especially during May and the time of the end of the World War II, idea that Soviet Union and especially Russia liberated this region, and that in such case it's really time for the development of cooperation or such friendship among these countries and inhabitants of these countries with Russia, like expression of thanks for liberation from Nazism and fascism in the time of World War II. But really, Slovak journalists presented ideas or evidences that it's not just such innocent effort to create cooperation and friendship, because they very strongly support also this military or paramilitary organization in these countries, including Slovak national, this People Party, our Slovakia. May I ask you to switch to the next slide, please? Thank you. And really, the part of this public presentation of populism and extremism is anti-Semitism and isolationism. Especially during this time of migration crisis in mid of the previous or past decade, I mean 2015-16, there was a very strong effort against acceptance of migrants, refugees, especially from Muslim countries, and it was used or apologized, justified with the defense of Christian culture, heritage, and civilization against Muslims. And especially in this effort, very, very strong role was played by Christian churches, and especially Catholic Church in Poland, really, because according to them, I mean, these Catholic bishops and the leader of Catholic Church in Poland, Poland is perhaps the last fort of Christianity in Europe, and it's necessary defense this Christian civilization and Christian religion against invasion of Muslims from Syria and its neighboring countries, because it's very dangerous for future of European civilization and Christian civilization generally. Really, it's a very strong effort, and I can mention that also it's almost the same position of Slovak Catholic Church, and I think that many of you remember the position of Hungarian government and especially its Prime Minister Viktor Orban, how he presented like one of the strong force against these migrants, refugees from this Syria and neighboring countries. And generally, it's not just this populism and extremism against migrants and influences from Muslim countries, but also its internal war inside of these countries, because you perhaps remember that Poland has one of the most strict, rigorous abortion laws in Europe, and it's almost the same tendency or effort of Slovak Christian Catholic movements included in some political parties in Slovakia to prepare and in parliament to present it a necessity to accept rigid anti-abortional law, because according to them it's necessary to keep this culture of life in contrast to culture of death. What is idea presented one of the former popes, John Paul II, or originated in Poland, born in Poland, and they use these ideas like slogan for effort and for rejection of many liberal ideas from Brussels and EU. Really, it's not just so-called war against the migrants and refugees and the defense of Christianity, Christian civilization and European civilization and culture against external influences outside of EU or Europe generally. But there is also a very strong effort to keep traditional conservative values against the effort or trends transferred from Western Europe and the European Union generally. So for this reason, very often they try to keep these ethical and cultural issues outside of debates with European Union or Western European countries included in the European Union, because according to this conservative, especially Catholic, or not just Catholic, but generally Christian cycles, it's necessary to keep life against the death, and it's necessary to support life against death. And European legislation is very often presented like the culture of death. Next, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Tomio Okamura, it's one of Czech contemporary politicians, leader of this political party, Svoboda and Přímá Demokracie, Liberty and Direct Democracy. He is originated or born like a mix of Czech and Japanese parents, and he lives many years also in Japan. But really he returned back to Czech Republic, and especially from the beginning of the 1990s, he is very active in Czech politics. And sometimes, a few years ago, he was vice chair of Czech parliament due to result of political parliamentary elections. And really, he is one of the strong Eurosceptics within Czech politics, and perhaps the following of Jean-Jacques Rousseau ideas about the direct democracy, and especially from contemporary Switzerland, he prefers return back to such political theater, perhaps, that every issue, political or social issue, could be possible to solve through this direct democracy, through referenda and such similar ideas. And according to him, despite the fact that he is critics of communism, these communist regimes in the former Czechoslovakia and other Soviet satellites, according to him, it's socialism generally very useful political project with involving of people to political decision making and so on. But really, he is very strongly populist politician, because according to him, it's necessary to political power put in hands of people without strong government, parliament, and so on. And including his populism is really, especially from this time of past decade, anti-Islamism, and he is really very strongly involved in efforts against migrants and acceptance of European quotas for distribution of these Muslim immigrants into members of European EU countries. And he justifies his effort by patriotism and nationalism, because it's necessary, especially focus on interests of Czech people, in contrast to EU interests of migrants, refugees, and so on. Really, it's one of dangerous position within this Czech political scene, because he used this perhaps people's fear, to create his picture of defender of democracy, defender of Czech culture or European culture against the invasion of Muslims and non-European people and non-European culture or civilization into Europe. Next slide, please. Thank you. I mentioned among these extremist and populist political parties which are involved in national parliament in Hungary, Jobbik, and in Slovakia, this Kotleba's People Party of Slovakia. And really, it's very interesting and dangerous that these political parties, especially in the period of few years ago, were very popular among young generation, because Jobbik really, it was the trends following this university students movement in Hungary. And this Kotleba's People Party, it's also something similar, and he was originally a teacher at the secondary school in Banská Bystrica in central Slovakia, capital of the central Slovak region. And it's very curious and, in my opinion, also dangerous that this party, including this person, Marian Kotleba, won regional elections in this region in 2014. Why? For why a reason it's such interesting, curious, or dangerous? Especially this region, central Slovak region, during the World War II and during the Slovak national uprising from August 1944 to the end of World War II was center of uprising against fascism and Nazism generally, and due to this fact, many villages and many inhabitants were destroyed and killed during this uprising. And despite this fact that really the people of this region had a very strong, awful experience with Nazism and fascism, not just German, but also a Slovak kind of fascism, because Slovakia was during the World War the second satellite of Germany, and participated in Slovak army participated in war against former Soviet Union, or against in war against the Poland in the September 1939, and really they tried to liberate Slovak people from this close relationships to Germany, and to helping German army in their war against Soviet Union, and generally to help liberation of Slovakia, or the former Czechoslovakia. And despite this fact that many of parents of this generation and grandparents of these people, of voters in 2014, they voted this regional, or not regional, but especially within these regional elections, this party, and Mr. Marian Kotleba was elected like the chief of this region due to this result of elections. And really, it was awful experience of Slovakia, which didn't repeat against in 4 or 5 years again, because in the next regional elections in 2018, really this political party and Kotleba was defeated, beaten, and the coalition of central-right political parties won these elections and created a new situation in this Slovak central region. But really is very dangerous that especially young generation without perhaps historical memory and historical experience with fascism and Nazism, including Slovak Republic during the World War II, voted this political party and prefer their hate speeches against political establishment in Slovakia generally, and especially against the migrants, Rome communities, and so on. So for this reason, really, it's dangerous. And I mentioned earlier that perhaps there are indirect evidences that such political parties, including this political party in Slovakia, are financially supported by Russia, like effort destroy the stability of this political democracy in Slovakia, or in this Central Eastern European region generally. May I ask you to go to the next slide? Thank you. But now I try to focus much more attention on Hungarian case of populism. Claire has today mentioned in a few cases also situation in or position of Hungary now in a context with this Russian-Ukrainian war and the Russian invasion to Ukraine. And it seems to me that it's one of such tendencies or trends, especially in Hungarian politics of the last years or perhaps one decade, because especially from 2014, the Prime Minister Viktor Orban explained that the effort of Hungary will be build a liberal democracy in Hungary, in contrast to these liberal democracies in Western European countries or in Western civilization generally, that it's such effort how to change this vision within Hungarian politics. In my opinion, it's like a justification for this populism, which is part of not just Viktor Orban's presentations, but Fidesz politics generally, because it's possible to justify differences in using of law or generally rules which are valid within EU countries or EU generally, but I mean Orban and Fidesz try to apologize the differences in using also European monies from these projects for different purposes and issues for development of their strong political position in country, in contrast to opposition, democratic opposition, I mean, especially. Really, like the last parliamentary elections in February 2022 and its result and Orban's expressions about the situation of Fidesz party in Europe that is such strong that it's impossible to compare with any other EU countries and EU country. And I think that such example of his populism, it's his expression that really this winner of political parliamentary elections, it's possible to see not just from Brussels but from universe, that it's such huge populist slogan and expression of politician that perhaps it's impossible to find any similar expression among European political leaders, that it's huge proud about the result of these parliamentary elections and effort of Hungarian politics generally, including leading by Fidesz and personally Viktor Orban. That this illiberal democracy is presented like contrast to these liberal trends or movements in EU countries and EU generally, like a defense of national interests and needs of Hungary, in contrast to this general preferences by EU leaders or EU Commission. Next slide, please. Yeah, this trend, I think, in Hungarian politics was or started in 2014 in one political rally which performed Viktor Orban in Romania among ethnic Hungarians which live in this region, and really he explained to them that it's necessary to decide about using of liberal principles of politics in the future, despite this fact that it's in contrast to national interests of Hungarians generally, not just Hungarian Republic, because very often whether Viktor Orban or other Hungarian politicians presented like politicians or defenders of Hungarians in other parts of the world. That it's not very useful for mutual relationships among Hungary on the one hand and its neighbors, including Romania, Slovakia, Serbia, Ukraine, for example, because it's very strong effort how to extend the Hungarian political interests outside of boundaries, borders, Hungarian borders. Very often and through many paths or ways, Hungarian government try to influence Hungarian minorities in these countries. There is very strong financial support for them and preference of such minorities' interests, which are much more closer to Hungarian political interests, and especially this Fidesz political party, in contrast to effort to involve these Hungarian minorities in culture and social life of these countries where they live. So in this case, in many aspects, not just from Prime Minister of Viktor Orban, but also previous politicians and governments, there were a strong effort to influence internal politics of neighboring countries through Hungarian minorities. I know that really there is such effort, and also now, and not just through political parties of these minorities, political parties in these countries, but also through football clubs and other sport or cultural organizations which could help to present these ideas about the meaning and role of Hungary in this Central European region. And in this case, really, it's such effort to build not a cooperation and mutual helping with neighbor countries, but on the other hand, or on the contrary, it's such effort how to keep these Hungarian minorities out of social and cultural life of country. Yeah, I see that Clarchos has questions or comments. I'm waiting for your yeah.
Vasil, I'll put my question verbally, having put it down in writing. I have two interlinked questions which flow from my earlier presentation, but they also interlink with your own. Firstly, if they exist, how effective are the party financing laws of Slovakia or other parts of the V4, particularly in terms of requiring political parties to publish annual audited accounts and to disclose their sources of funding? Secondly, in practice, how transparent are political parties in Slovakia or other parts of the V4? Now, there's a reason why I ask these questions. The reason is that transparency is surely one of the keys to preventing foreign state or non-state actors from improperly interfering in domestic politics. In addition, transparency is one of the keys to ensuring the overall health of any political democracy. Hence my two questions.
Okay, thank you. You are right. There is very important issues concerning financial support of political parties, whether from external sources, I mean, for example, from Hungarian government. And in case of Hungarian minority political parties, it's very interesting that they are not financially supported directly by government, but through many cultural social organizations which are like funds for supporting of Hungarian minorities outside of Hungary, but they used also other private companies which are very close connected with Hungarian government, including Prime Minister Orban. For example, football club in Dunajska Streda, it's at the Slovak-Hungarian borders, is financially supported by Hungarian mall is a petrol company, and it's a Slovak daughter, Slovnaft, and they are a very strong stakeholder of this company, football or soccer club. And it's one of such effort how it's possible to use this money and funds from private and public sectors for supporting of these national minorities and political parties, including sport clubs, cultural institutions, and so on. And the second one, second question concerning generally supporting financial transparency of political parties in Slovakia. It's very big effort of political parties to be transparent in their financial external sources, especially in the first decade of this century. There were many such financial scandals of leading political parties, including this central right coalition, Slovak Democratic Union, which won these parliamentary elections in 1998, and in 2006 really this coalition and the government was beaten during the parliamentary elections because there were such financial scandals, and the title of this scandal or story in Slovak language generally is Gorilla, because Slovak intelligence services investigated these relationships among Slovak politicians and businessmen, and saw that really many business company financially illegally supported these political parties, and they use them like lobbyists for presenting their interest within Slovak laws, economic circumstances, and so on. So for this reason, really, generally, despite these scandals, there is not such strong effort to receive or prepare law for transparent control of these external financial sources of Slovak political parties. Okay, I see that we moved to the next slide, and in this case, really, it's possible to see that it's almost the same, especially in Hungary, because Hungary is a little bit bigger country with about 10 million inhabitants. And this system of illiberal democracy built by Orban and Fidesz really is very strongly based on economic and political goals, because there is a very close connection. I mentioned earlier that it's a very close connection of this Hungarian petrol company, MOL, which is one of the strongest players in this kind of business in Central Eastern European region, and Hungarian government, including Prime Minister Viktor Orban. And really, on the other hand, included, for example, the sentence, the second sentence in this slide, that a Hungarian prime minister used very often such very populist expression against the minorities, against the unemployed people, because really he presented that his effort and the effort of Fidesz political party is especially support the majority, so-called white majority, against migrants, against unemployed people, and it's not directly expressed, but also against such people like Roma community without effort to be involved in this processes, work processes, job looking for jobs, and so on. So for this reason, really, it's dangerous, because especially at the beginning of this century, there were such attacks, violent attacks, with killing of some people among Roma communities in Hungary, especially due to such hate speeches from leaders of mentioned political party Jobbik. So in such case, I think that this Orban's populism and Fidesz populism generally is dangerous for social climate of Hungarian society. But it's almost the same in for example, in Slovakia or in Czech Republic, because there are strong Roma communities, and in such cases, some of these politicians in these countries use, especially before political parliamentary elections, like a very useful tool how to focus attention of voters to them and their interests. That they try to keep national interests of ordinary people, in contrast to government, for example, or other political parties, which prefer the minorities' rights, cultural diversity, and so on. Next slide, please. It's very interesting and curious that really in some expressions of Viktor Orban we can find that he is influenced by Asian model, with high level of social discipline and low levels of public dissent. And really many such steps made by Hungarian government was that they fired many independent newspapers, medias generally, including, for example, Central European University from Budapest, because the academicians presented, or academics presented very often independent views or opinions against Fidesz and Orban. And for this reason, Viktor Orban used his lawful options how to limit existence of this Central European University in Budapest, and especially the financial support of this university from external sources, especially from US, and the founder of this university Hungarian-born George Soros was such a reason that the Hungarian parliament received a law against the existence of foreign universities in Hungary, and for this reason Central European University moved from Budapest to Vienna. But generally, George Soros is one of such targets, and the most significant target, perhaps, of attacks Hungarian government, including Viktor Orban, because according to them, Soros is responsible for any social problems of Hungary, including, for example, this migration crisis, and the transfer of this or efforts to transfer Muslim migrants or refugees from EU generally equally to other European countries, and generally is such strong effort. Also, before this current this year's parliamentary elections, George Soros was such a target who is responsible also for this Russian-Ukrainian war, and generally US is responsible for this war, and in this war Hungary used different position in contrast to the majority of EU countries, including NATO countries, and they tried to be neutral in this war, and didn't offer possibility to transfer guns and any weapons through Hungarian territory for helping or supporting Ukraine and Ukrainian army generally. On the other hand, it's true that they received many Ukrainian refugees, and it's natural, like other neighboring countries, including especially Poland, which received much more of these Ukrainian refugees, and also in Slovakia. It's almost the same, but in Slovakia it's just about 300,000 refugees who received or transferred, arrived to Slovakia from Ukraine, in contrast to Poland, where is about 3 million people who arrived from Ukraine to Poland. So really, I mentioned that there is effort how to keep Hungary from criteria or measure of Western democratic traditions and values, and prefer national interests and needs in contrast to European values, democratic values, or ethical moral values, because in this case, according to Orban and Fidesz, or Hungarian government, the interests of them are our other interests of EU, including these interests in this Russian-Ukrainian war, because Orban expressed that in such case, to be involved in supporting of Ukraine, Hungary could be target of the next Russian attacks. But I think, and many other experts, including journalists, expressed that Hungary, and including Viktor Orban, they have very strong relationships and friendship with Russia generally, including Orban's and Putin's relationships, that I don't like to explain such perhaps the indirect evidences, but I recently read that there perhaps could be any agreement, perhaps informal agreement, that in case of splitting of Ukraine, Hungary could be accepted some part of Ukraine, former Kingdom of Hungary, like new territory, which is inhabited by a Hungarian minority in Ukraine. But it's really such didn't it was not confronted with real any evidence, but it's such idea of some journalists that it could be one of the reasons such very mediated and position of Hungary to this Russian-Ukraine war. Next slide, please. I think that we can go to the next slide because in different cases I explain this situation. On this slide you can see just a few examples of this effort, how to Hungarian government change previous traditions or constitution in accordance with its goals and in effort to keep the strong Fidesz position within Hungarian parliamentary system. So for this reason, really they changed many traditions and posts within Hungarian system of law and parliamentary system to keep the stable position of Fidesz in these offices and to keep them for the future. Next slide, please. In this case, I like to present idea of American moral philosopher or philosopher generally Martha Nussbaum and her ideas about the meaning of philosophy of education for democracy. She wrote in 2006 one of her many articles, and this one was focused especially on the role and meaning of education for democracy, especially in accordance with the dangers for these democracies, not just in US, because really she started her reasoning from US situation, but also in other parts of the world. And for this reason, she explained that really it's necessary to educate, especially young generation, for democratic values, because without such education, it could be impossible to keep democratic values in the future, because there are many external influences and factors which could diminish the meaning of these values without strong effort of governments, society, culture generally. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. According to her, especially it's necessary to focus on three very important part of this education. And the first one is following really this ancient Greek traditions and Socrates, which is known like try to see and see what our lives in context with other people within this community, and it's necessary to try to do this life like examined life. And the next one is really necessary to cultivate capacity for this effective democratic citizenship. Yesterday, Katerina, all her presentation focused especially on citizenship and difficulties with citizenship in EU countries, acceptance rules for citizenship and so on. And really, I think that also these Nussbaum's expressions are useful, like necessity for attention to focus our attention on these democratic values and the building of democratic citizenship of especially young generation. And for this reason, it's a really very strong role or position of educational system in the Central European countries, how to develop these democratic values in young generation and democratic citizenship among them. Next slide, please. And it seems to me that very useful is this third one among these Nussbaum's criteria or focuses, which is necessary to do this narrative imagination. Especially is necessary to keep our seeing or notions about the others through their lens. That it's necessary to accept that we are not just myself or ourselves with our culture, traditions, history, and so on, that there are many other cultures or individuals, communities, nations, cultures, and for mutual relationships, for creation or building, developing the common good within our societies, is necessary to try to accept them and to understand them with their traditions, history, and needs within these mutual relationships. I think that especially in our neighboring countries, I mean neighboring countries with Ukraine, and due to this awful situation in behind our east borders, I mentioned that our countries received many Ukrainian people, and in this case it's possible to see that there is a majority of inhabitants, people in these countries who like to support, to help them, in contrast to minorities which really prefer, including, I'm afraid, including some politicians. It's the case of Slovakia, former Prime Minister, for example, Robert Fico, or Peter Pellegrini, who presented that it's necessary to prefer interests of Slovak people, that it's just enough with these refugees from Ukraine, but mostly people are prepared to help these migrants from Ukraine, especially, for example, in case of my region, because I live in East Slovakia. From my university or my city, Prešov, it's about 100 kilometers, just 100 kilometers to Ukrainian borders. So many Ukrainian students studied at our university many years ago, not just now, and really we have many close friends in Ukraine. So for this reason, it's very naturally for us to help them, to support them. Next slide, please.
Yes, Vasil. Before I turn to the next slide, because I see that the time is passing and the clock is ticking. Can I please ask how many more slides do you have?
Just you can slowly go through these slides, and you can see that there are such options. It's possible to include these values in educational system of these countries. And it's enough, I think, that I can finish my presentation and my speech And it's time for a few minutes of questions and answers or comments.
Thank you, Vasil. So do you want me to project a particular slide?
No, you can finish my presentation. Stop my presentation.
Thank you, Vasil. We can make the presentation actually available via the MS Teams folder as well, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
So that participants can actually download the presentations. I'm not sure whether you have the presentations, Andreas or Alexandra. Okay, so if we can add all the presentations to the MS Teams, and I will send you the one of Vasil. Yeah, and the one of Katerina, I suspect. Good, very good. So Vasil, we will share your slides, but we thought it's interesting and timely to have some discussion because, you know, you are raising a lot of very interesting, not only philosophical, but societal issues. So because we're supposed to break up for lunch very soon, the floor is open to questions, comments, from anyone in the room or on the chat, or taking the microphone as well. So I'm wondering, Claire, I'm wondering whether you wanted to come back to your comment, your initial comment, and then I think I have Andreas here. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. Yes, thank you, Vasil. There is a serious problem with irregular migration and the demographic transformation of Europe, and that's something that political parties cannot avoid. We've seen profound and unprecedented transformations across Europe. And I would suggest it's understandable for political parties to want to address that issue. That, however, overlaps with Euroscepticism, because with EU membership comes the loss of sovereignty, to all intents and purposes, over the border of the state. So my question is as follows: to what extent are we seeing in the G4 countries the emergence of what we used to call in the United Kingdom a Eurosceptic movement? And to what extent is the Eurosceptic movement spilling over into the equivalent of a Brexit movement? Partly because of migration issues, partly because of border control issues, and partly for other reasons.
I think that generally in this region, I mean Visegrad 4 group, is mostly I think the tendency or opinion about advantages of membership in EU, including also membership in NATO, especially after this Russian invasion to Ukraine, because we saw, I mean, especially our politicians, including societies, that EU and NATO offer such umbrella, not just for economic, financial interests of these countries, but also for national existence. Because I think that despite these differences in opinions concerning the using or the preferences of liberal ideas from Brussels or EU generally, but mostly, in my opinion, especially within Slovakia, Czech Republic or Poland, despite this fact that Poland has such troubles with, or in some cases, very similar troubles with acceptance of EU law and rules like Hungary. But now, especially in this case of Russian-Ukrainian war, I think that Poland accepts a very strong position in this case against Russia and Russian invasion. And for this reason, perhaps it's a little bit different opinion of EU leaders or EU Commission, including European Parliament, in case of Poland and in case of Hungary. But I think that generally, for example, in Slovakia and Czech Republic, the Euroscepticism is not strong, despite this fact that really there is presented among some political parties, also parliamentary political parties. But for people, according to my opinion, it's much more useful to be part of Europe, including these European institutions. And this Euroscepticism is perhaps such political theater of some politicians and some political parties, not a general trend, in my opinion, in especially Czech Republic and Slovakia. And I think that generally also in Poland, there is a very strong support of EU values and democratic institutions. But on the other hand, there is a different position of Polish government, especially in case of law or this lawful or justice institutions and media, newspaper. But it's not such difficult, in my opinion, like in Hungary, because I think that Polish democratic tradition is much more stronger in contrast to Hungarian. The result of last political parliamentary elections are not such big differences between government coalition in Poland and opposition, like in case of Hungary, because really the last result of these parliamentary elections was awful for this political opposition, democratic opposition in Hungary. So I really think that Euroscepticism, despite this Brexit experience, it's not such strong trend in the Central European region. Perhaps sometimes it's possible to listen about the Hungarian exit from EU, but really I don't think that it could be useful for Hungary, generally including Hungarian political parties and Fidesz and Viktor Orban, because they need very often this budget of EU, including this plan of renewal of EU after this pandemic crisis and so on. So for this reason, it's very pragmatic purpose to stay in EU also for Hungary. So my response, my opinion about this Eurosceptic trends in this our region.
Thank you very much, Vasil.
You're welcome.
I do myself have a few comments, but what I'm thinking now is that we can stop this session, we can go to a break, and then when we return, we can begin the roundtable discussion with some comments that I have on your presentation, and then of course everyone is free to join and offer any questions or comments they have on the rule of law more broadly and on populism more generally. There's a comment from Dinesh earlier, and there's also a question that was posed yesterday but was not answered. Then maybe we can start from that. So thank you, Vasil. Thanks everyone for sticking around for this session. We'll take a short break and we can reconvene at around 1 o'clock with the roundtable discussion.
So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Vasil.
So yeah, we'll reconvene in about 20 minutes.